Hi everyone, you're all very welcome to another YouTube video here today for the market open, US session open in the next 10 minutes or so. So of course today markets are fairly tepid, and of course the subject in the video, a little bit of risk aversion today, this morning, yesterday, in a little bit of backdrop of profit taking off of Friday's stock market close. Very, very visible, stronger close on Friday night. But of course, markets have opened a little bit on the back foot over the weekend, and of course in the early hours of today. And we are seeing a little bit of bottoming out in the price action, which we'll obviously go through very, very shortly. But market dynamic is very much risk aversion, a little bit of profit taking into tomorrow's NFP. Now it'll be interesting to see if there's any sort of counter cycle rally today against some of the sell-offs, both this morning and of course yesterday, given that of course we do have month end today as well. So broadly speaking, as we kind of normally do, economic calendar today, kind of gearing towards, as I said, really tomorrow's price action. Of course, we did have some data out at 2 o'clock with the Case-Shiller home price index coming in less than expected. The US house pricing index obviously coming in less than expected as well. So as it comes to the Fed's meeting tomorrow, as it releases its statement and its interest rate decision at 7 p.m. here local time in the UK, all eyes will very much be gearing towards the 7:30 press conference where Fed Chair Powell, should I say, gives his, I suppose, latest updates on the markets, broadly speaking, and of course then the Q&A, which will follow afterwards. So really and truly, we're probably expecting a fairly consolidated couple of days this week. As I said, a little bit of profit taking in the markets, but of course, all attention will be gearing towards, as I said, Wednesday, Fed. Of course, we do have ISMs tomorrow as well out before that. Thursday, Bank of England, ECB, and of course the big three in the US, Apple, Amazon, and Google, all reporting stock earnings on Thursday night after the bell closing. Now, of course, Friday, we are rounding out the week with NFP as well. So broadly speaking, really from this afternoon into Friday, we are expecting a very, very turbulent week in the markets. Very, very much a strong emphasis on risk management, that risk orientation, but of course, understanding the sentiment within the broader markets as well. So of course, as we look at broader dynamic today, what are we seeing in the markets? Well, firstly, let's have a look at kind of current cycles of where we were on Friday and of course where we are currently this morning. From Friday's afternoon's, Friday evening's close, we have seen a very, very strong run off to the downside, both yesterday, that stronger slide yesterday in the indices, and of course this morning, where we have found a bottom around about 10 o'clock this morning or so, and we have seen a little bit of an uptick in price action. However, that's really only backed flat from where we were come 8 o'clock this morning on the London Open. Of course, from Friday's close into last night's close, broadly speaking, market dynamic is still very much tilted to this downside, and it's just being aware of that as well. Now, of course, as we look at market dynamics today, okay, we can see obviously that the point of control, we talked about the point of control last week around that 4,020 level, very much kind of back and forth. Now on Friday, we did get that fairly strong elevation, stronger close, a little bit of profit taking into the close on Friday. But of course, today we are back down to that volume area that we saw last week. If you go back to the 26th to the 27th, last Thursday, for example, as a kind of a marker on that, we can see that value area very much around the 420 level, 420.30 level is very much in check. And of course, fast forward to today, month end, we can see obviously very, very clear reaction this morning off that 4,000 level and back above that previous value area that we kind of talked about from last week when we were trading way back over here last Thursday into last Friday as well, broadly speaking. So market dynamics is really going to be poised here. I think anything above 4,000, we're still holding that kind of watermark. I think 420, I think that POC is going to be a very, very important level into the open today between that 2:33 p.m., that 30-minute open on the cash markets. And then, of course, just reinforcing that rhetoric, because, of course, if you look at the broader narratives over the last week or so, pretty much since the middle of the month, we've had that very, very clear continuation and trending price action in the US markets. The dollars continued lower, gold prices continued higher, the indices continued higher, obviously into Friday's evening's close. And of course, since then, gold has come back a little bit. Dollar strength, that rotational movements into the markets has come back in terms of dollar strength. And the indices on the other side of that are obviously playing as counterparty to it, obviously, in the downside, as we saw with that dollar strength and hedge today, particularly, obviously, the indices this morning, obviously moving lower. And of course, the DXY is a very, very strong indicator of that, because, of course, the DXY today has broken through from yesterday morning's lows and very, very strong impulse back above this 102.50 level, or back above this 102 level again. So that's kind of where we are currently in the broader sentiment in the markets. A little bit of risk aversion, I suspect, but broadly speaking, just see how does the market dynamic react here at 4,000 into today's open at 4,020. So if we look at the half an hour slots, the 30-minute time frames, we can obviously see that fairly very strong V-shaped recovery. 4020, we are just trading modestly above the point of control. So this 40 kind of 15, 16 as high as the 4020. So of course, the value lows at 4012. This area is going to be particularly important today to make sure that the market dynamic holds above that into 3 o'clock. If we see that level hold above that kind of POC value area low, I think you might actually see a little bit of buying into the market today, given the fact that we have seen a little bit of a V-shaped recovery since this morning at 10 o'clock. But if we see those POCs, that value area level go, then the likelihood is you're probably going to see that slide. You're going to see a retest of those lows, and the likelihood is for a potentially even deeper runoff today in the indices. So the S&P, NASDAQ, Dow Jones, obviously quite important in that regard. Now, similar regard as well, if we look at the NASDAQ, where have we been, or what has the NASDAQ done in recent weeks? Well, of course, since the NFP rally, very, very clear, significant moves. Despite the CPI, we did temporarily get above the December highs in the NASDAQ, above 12,200 briefly on Friday. But obviously, of course, with that profit taking, that evolution, that kind of runoff, we have seen that kind of runoff yesterday. Market dynamic back in here at 11,800, where we were holding mid-session lows. And of course, this morning, again, very, very similar scenario to the NASDAQ, very, very clear runoff back into 11.8, holding above that at the minute. And of course, as we look at the market profiles, NASDAQ 100 as well, we can see that 11.8, 11.850 is going to be a very, very statistically important level. And of course, we've got 58 is the value lows, 88.2s is a point of control, but we have had a deeper runoff nearly back as low as 11,800. So I think 850, 880s is really, really important here, because of course, as we look into the E-prints, we are seeing E-prints up here at 11,934. However, market dynamic could very easily shift back into some of these levels. And of course, 880, 850 is coming really back down here, where we start to see that kind of rally over the last couple of hours. So this area here is going to be structurally kind of important today to see, does the markets hold up? I think you've got a nice little area here, value area 863. I think that's kind of worth paying close attention to here as well, to see if there is any sort of reaction. And of course, if we do hold above that level, then you're likely to see that kind of filtration back in, and a little bit of a correction against what's been some fairly decent selling, as I said, on Friday evening, and of course into the majority of yesterday, where the markets really only kind of went one way, except for a little bit around the open yesterday afternoon. So other than that, really, that's kind of where we are at the minute. S&Ps obviously moving lower as we speak into the open. A couple of minutes away from the open, we'll assess and evaluate the price action into the open. NASDAQ following suit back into this area. And of course, the Dow Jones, which had a very, very aggressive move this morning, is obviously seeing a little bit of a retrace as well. So all three US-based indices has broken above that kind of watermark where we sold off from 8 o'clock this morning. So it's not really that surprising to potentially see a little bit of a correction back into some of these levels. And of course, if you're looking at the Dow Jones, you're really focused on this 600, 650 area, because of course that's where kind of the market profiles are holding up relatively well for today. And of course, if we go USA 30, we've got the value areas and the order blocks, the liquidity moves. But of course, if we look at the market profiles, of course, 33, 712 and 644 is POC and value low respectively. So of course, 712, we are even some way above the POC at the minute, but of course value lows is kind of way down in this region here. So worth evaluating to see if there is any sort of reaction. Of course, this could be a short-term peak again. We've had a lower high yesterday. If you look at the price action yesterday, there was a fairly strong run up into the session open and a very, very quick unwind. So you just want to be patient as well to make sure that if we do start selling off, that we are holding through those value areas, through those important liquidity areas. Otherwise, it's going to be like a hot knife through butter. You're going to see those levels erode, and you're going to probably see even further selling through the course of the afternoon. So I think that kind of first 15, 20 minutes, I think, is probably going to set the tone for directional bias for the afternoon. And of course, then being able to make very, very clear decisions off the back of that. But as we speak into the open, obviously, indices doing quite well against a fairly decent sell-off yesterday, but also on gold as well. If you look at the gold movements yesterday, over the last number of days or so, if you look at the higher time frame approach, very, very strong sell-off from that 47 weekly area we talked about in last week's call, last Tuesday's call. Of course, if you're looking at the broader range, very, very clear consolidation, temporary break this morning back into this value area again, even here on gold as well. So even gold is worth paying close attention to today, because of course, anywhere from 1924, 28, you might see a kind of a reaction from there. So worth keeping an eye on this region as well, particularly if we see the indices give way, particularly if we see that dollar strength continue to play it through the course of the afternoon, then the likelihood is you're probably going to see those gold markets, gold pairs sell off and potentially run even lower again. So just be kind of wary of that as well. If that risk orientation from stronger indices this morning goes back to the safety play, stronger dollar in that regard as well. So as we look at the markets, on the open, it's just gone 230. Just a quick kind of look at the open, initial buying coming through. But as I said, really kind of looking to see if there's any sort of reaction here between kind of 10s and 15s on the S&Ps. A little bit of a trail off, but you're going to kind of see that up and down in that kind of first kind of 5 minutes anyway. Same with NASDAQ, a little bit of sell off into the open really from 2 o'clock. But of course, we need to see if there's any sort of reaction from those value areas. And of course, last but not least as well, Dow Jones is trying to push higher through those near-term tops as well, like the other two are doing so. But of course, waiting to see if there is any sort of reaction. Those kind of first couple of minutes, you're going to see price action up and down anyway. I think it's better off being patient, waiting for those areas, identify those levels, those markups, and then being able to see where the value areas, where the value plays are, and then finding those trades accordingly. Otherwise, you're potentially buying when you should be selling, and vice versa. So there's a little bit of a thought process here as well. And you can even see as ready the Dow Jones, that initial pump in the first 60, 90 seconds or so looks to be eroding as well. NASDAQ is holding up relatively well, and the S&Ps is also holding up relatively well. But let's see, does that sustain through the first few minutes of the open? Because of course, could very easily come back on itself. In other markets, the yields have still continued to chop around 3.5%. We talked about it last week. Still obviously fairly kind of clear progression of price action around that into accumulation. I suspect that's going to remain the case until tomorrow, at least until we get the next update from the Fed. The FX pairs as well, fairly strong movements in the euro dollar today, kind of like the indices, kind of like gold. A little bit of a runoff from yesterday. Has returned back up into this value area, back above 108.50, and cable likewise doing so. A little bit of a sell-off this morning, trying to find it's a little bit of a recovery as well. So dollar is going to be interesting play, just to particularly to see, does that risk orientation continue? If we start to see the indices and risk off play back out since this morning's open, and then of course you're looking at weaker dollar, you're probably looking at dollar coming back even lower again into 101.80. But broadly speaking, when you look at the broader markets over the last week or so, in the likes of the DXY, in the likes of the indices, very, very migrating to continued accumulation, particularly in the DXY as well. So it's just about being aware of that. Now, I suppose one final look before we wrap up for today's open call as well. S&P buying on the open is still holding in there for the last 2 or 3 minutes or so. NASDAQ is holding at kind of near-term session highs. And of course, the Dow Jones is starting to migrate to the downside. So even here in the Dow Jones, it has broken through those 8 o'clock highs, takeout session highs, and is now coming back in. So we'd look to see, is the S&P, is the NASDAQ going to follow suit? Because the Dow Jones is selling off at the moment. If the others two start to follow suit, you could see some nice little short-term selling, as I said, back into kind of 12s, 14s here in the S&Ps. And I suppose, as I said in the NASDAQ, back to those value areas as well. So keep an eye on those through the day. And of course, seeing if there is any sort of reaction, as we said, off of those profile levels. So 700s on Dow Jones, on the NAS. If we just open that up again very, very quickly, 11,880, 11,850, I think that's going to be a crucial area. And of course, then on the SPX 500, of course, we will be looking at that area between kind of 14 and 22. Now, of course, the POC has moved up ever so slightly on the S&Ps as well. So it's obviously filtered through because, of course, the E and the F prints being located at 28. But worth keeping an eye to see if there is any sort of reaction here, particularly from, let's say, 20 back to 15 as well. So we're keeping an eye on those initial POC levels. That's pretty much it for the open, guys and ladies. Of course, this evening we will be back for a weekly webinar. Tonight's call is going to be focused on tomorrow's FOMC and Thursday's BOE and ECB interest rate decision meeting. So we'll be looking at the data, we'll be looking at the dot plot, we'll be looking at the information in fairly detailed fashion. So of course, if you are interested, feel free to pop onto that within our community as well. All right, have a great afternoon, everyone, and trade safe.